Sri Ramana Paravidyopanishad, the supreme science of the self as taught by Sri Ramana. There are the two diverse creeds held, respectively, by those who say the world is real and those who say it is unreal. The earnest aspirant for deliverance can win experience of the truth of the self without taking up a definite stand on this question. That this seemingly important question can be bypassed by one who is intent on becoming free. The creatures alike want perfect happiness, that is, unmixed with suffering and which will last forever. This is not wrong because happiness is the real nature of all creatures. So one should inquire where such happiness can be had. That happiness is the very nature of the self, is the great discovery made by all the sages. In the Bhriguvali of the Taittiriya Upanishad, it is said that as a result of this quest for the truth, he realized this truth, that the supreme reality, the self, is bliss. He also knew at the same time that bliss is the source of all living creatures, their support during life, and the goal they have to come back to in the end. Bhagavan also used to say, in answer to the question, how to become free, go back to the source out of which you came forth. Where then is that perfect happiness? To the seeker of deliverance who has perfect non-attachment, Bhagavan tells in what state that happiness dwells and by what means it can be won. The state of deep sleep is dear to all creatures, and it is dear because it is happy. But in that state, there are no objects of enjoyment. What can be the source of this sleep happiness? It is supposed by all people that happiness consists of a series of pleasures that come by the contact of external objects through the senses. But deep, dreamless sleep is a state of happiness, though there are no objects of enjoyment therein. Everyone describes his sleep experience thus: I slept happily, but I knew nothing then. So, this poses a question rarely asked. What is the cause or source of this happiness? That this question needs to be posed and an answer obtained, we learn for the first time from the Guru sage. Only he can give us the answer. Deep sleep and the supreme state are similar. In both, the mind and the world are absent. But in both, the mind and the world, there is the eternal reality, the real self. It therefore follows that the self is the cause of the happiness in both of these states. Human intelligence cannot give this answer, but when this fact is revealed by the Guru, it is at once seen to be true, that the self does not cease to exist, but is present in deep sleep as in the other states, is undeniable, because, as Bhagavan has pointed out, excepting the highly sophisticated but purblind scientists, no one is able to say that he did not exist in sleep. So we learn that the real self, the supreme state, is the source of sleep happiness. This happiness of the self is infinite, whereas the happiness of sleep is nothing when compared to it. The happiness of sleep is fitful and meager because the mind survives, therein seed form. In the supreme state, there is infinite bliss, known as Ananda in the Vedantic lore. The happiness of the mind-free state is perfect. That of sleep is not to be compared to it. To distinguish it from the pleasure of worldly life, it is named Ananda in the Upanishads. The worldly enjoyment, though seemingly coming by the contact with objects, really has its source in this happiness nature of the self. Only by receiving a minute fraction of that supreme happiness do all the creatures enjoy life in this abode of the souls. If this source of happiness were not present, who would care to live in this world for even half a moment? Hence it follows that to all alike, the dearest of all things is the real self that shines in the supreme state as pure bliss. Therefore, to all creatures alike, the most beloved of all is that supreme state and nothing else. Since it is the happiness of deep sleep that all people love, not the state itself, and since that happiness has its source in the real self of the egoless state, it would be right to conclude that what they really love is that self, and the state in which its true nature is included, though only unknowingly. This is exactly what the sage Yajnavalkya told his wise wife Maitreya in this passage. Not for the sake of the husband is the husband dear, but for the sake of the self is the husband dear. Nor for the sake of the wife is the wife dear, but for the sake of the self is the wife dear. And on to the end of the passage. Not for the sake of anything is that thing dear, but for the sake of the self is anything dear. It is due to ignorance of the self that the love that we bear for the self is mistakenly interpreted as love for something or other. So, the problem of finding real happiness and escaping from suffering is solved only by becoming aware of the self as it really is. The teaching is proved by the next passage that concludes with the declaration that the self is all that there is. For the aspirant who has thus learned from the sage Guru that the supreme state is the home of eternal happiness, and who is therefore indifferent to this world and intent on winning that state, what is the use of any inquiry concerning the world? Let the world be real or otherwise. What is there in it for this aspirant to strive for? And let the reality in the supreme state be non-dual or otherwise. It is that alone that he wants to win, not else. The two questions, one concerning the reality of the world, the other concerning the non-duality of the real self, are really one. Both questions become superfluous for one who has resolved to strive for that state. Only by becoming firmly established in the real self of that supreme state can one know definitely whether that reality is non-dual or not. How can anyone become aware of that truth while still wandering confusedly in the three states? Bhagavan gives the following analogy to express this fact. Just as it is proper to throw away the heap of shorn hair without scrutinizing it, so it is right for the aspirant to turn away from the world, which for him is of no value, without inquiry concerning it. The aspirant will naturally turn away from the world at once and, with his mind turned inwards, will strive for the goal. It is by turning the mind away from the world that the quest is made, and for that reason the world is certainly to be renounced. The quest taught by the Master implies turning away from the world. The mind has to be turned inwards, towards the self, because it dwells within. But this has been said for the fully ripe aspirant who is not attached to the world. But those who have not the needed strength of non-attachment, believing as they do that the world is real in its own right, cannot turn the mind inwards for the quest. So, for them, this inquiry is surely needful. These, by making the inquiry on the lines indicated by the Master, would become convinced that the world is not real in its own right. Then, by reflecting on this truth, they will become able, by degrees, to turn their minds inwards. This knowledge is therefore not a mere luxury of speculative philosophy, but is of practical value. The necessity for guidance by the Master in making this inquest on the world is now explained. An inquiry conducted on the basis of worldly experience alone, by reliance on one's own unaided intelligence, is vain. One should resort to a guru who is a sage and make this inquest on the world as guided by him. No inquiry can be made in a vacuum, but only on the basis of reliable evidence. Speculative philosophers, as in the West, proceed on the false assumption that worldly experience, the offspring of the primary ignorance, is good enough to be used as evidence for coming to a conclusion on a truth that transcends the world. Also, they believe that their intelligence is equal to the task of making a dispassionate inquiry. The knowledge derived from worldly experience is ignorance. Hence, it cannot be used as evidence. If relied on, it will lead to wrong conclusions. All worldly experience is rooted in ignorance. It is dreamlike. It takes place in worldliness. It pertains to men ignorant of the real self, and it is false. It is therefore no evidence for the seeker of deliverance in this discrimination between the real and the unreal. It has been explained that the three states of life waking, dream, and sleep take place in the profound sleep of ignorance, and hence even waking experience is dreamlike. And this inquiry involves disentangling the real from the unreal. Worldly experience is at best suspect. Its reality is itself in question. It is inseparable from the world, whose reality is in question. It must not therefore be assumed to be valid evidence. What then is valid evidence? For the aspirant who seeks to win the supreme state by transcending the relativity of the three states, the supreme evidence is the experience of the sage. He alone knows also the truth about the world because of his awareness of the reality, the self, in that state. The sage not only testifies to his own experience, but also furnishes flawless reasons drawn from our own worldly experience. But the disciple, if wise, will not go on posing questions without end, for the world of the Savior is not to be doubted by the aspirant. The sage's own experience is for us conclusive evidence. He is the compassionate one, the Savior who has assumed human form for redeeming those who have begun to feel the illusory quality of worldly life. So, one must, as a rule, accept what he says without cavil. At some stage, the series of questions must come to an end, and the way to the verification of the truth by one's own experience must be entered upon. As the Gita says, the inveterate doubter does not win the goal of life. There will be no end to doubt until one gets established in the supreme state. Only in that state is there an end of all doubts, due to the extinction of the doubter, the ego. Here is a reference to the Upanishadic text. When the one that is the truth of the high and the low is experienced, then the heart knot is cut. All doubts are dispelled, and all his actions are liquidated. Doubts, we are here told, arise in the ego-ridden mind, not in the egoless state. What then must the aspirant do? Since there is no finality in reason, the aspirant should at once give up reliance on reason. With faith in the Master's teaching, he must strive to win God on the lines taught by him. If a doubt arises, he should ask himself, who is it that doubts in this way? If by thus seeking he attains the supreme state, then both doubt and doubter will cease to be. The question, who is it that has this doubt, is the means prescribed by Bhagavan to turn the mind away from the doubt to the doubter, the ego. The answer to this question will be I. From this, the question will arise, who am I? Which is the quest? In the same way, any extraneous thought that intrudes, distracting the mind from the quest, can be used as a means of returning to the quest. If the quest is persistently pursued in this way, the ego, the doubter, becomes extinct, and no more doubts will arise, because the mind-free state is then attained. Now we come to the question, is the world real? Bhagavan's teaching on this point is given in the next verses. The Guru, who is a sage, teaches the unreality of the world in accordance with his own experience, also giving reason supporting it. The disciple, who aspires to become free, should accept this teaching with perfect faith and, with its help, strive for this goal. The universe comprising these three, the soul, God, and the world of visible objects, is superimposed by the mind on the real self, which is the sole reality of the supreme state. Hence, all this universe is just an outcome of ignorance. The mind is the creator of the universe. Ignorance is the primal cause of the mind. Hence, it is said here that this ignorance is the cause of the universe. That being so, when this ignorance is annihilated by the light of awareness of that self, then, along with it, the consequence of it, the world, will, like the darkness that disappears before sunlight at dawn, cease to appear. This universe, we see, shines in the dense darkness of ignorance, but does not shine in the great splendor of the light of self-awareness. If this universe were real, why does it not shine in the supreme state, lit as it is by the conscious, effulgent light of the real self? That which survives in the experience of the real self is the supreme state. That alone is real. All else is only unreal. This is the distinction between the real and the unreal, revealed to us by the teachings of all the sages. Om Namah Bhagavate Sri Arunachal Ramanaya.